Have you ever found yourself editing inside of DaVinci Resolve, and while you were working in the color tab, you notice that there's also a section that has the color wheels but in HDR. Now, if you're like me, you probably looked at that and just assumed, well, I'm not using an HDR workflow, I'm not delivering to HDR platforms or devices, so I don't need to worry about that. But hold up, that is a big mistake. I'm about to show you why this tab is actually one of the most powerful tools inside of the color tab, and I think everyone should be using it. Okay, so I have some clips here from a recent wedding that I just shot, and I'm gonna take this one here, I'm gonna go ahead and duplicate this clip over here, bring it up to my color tab, and I'm gonna reset the previous grade that I had put on it. I have already converted this from Sony S-Log3 to Rec. 709, and I do have a video coming out here soon with my updated color management workflow inside of DaVinci Resolve, so be sure to get subscribed so that you can see that. The first thing I need to do, of course, is just to make my minor corrections. And this, of course, can just be done in our primary color wheels. Now, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna grab this offset, and the image looks a little overall green to me, so I'm gonna bring some of that kind of orange back into it. After that, I'm just gonna add a small S curve to this. I'm just doing this quite simply, and when I do this, just make sure that you have editable splines checked right here. Makes your life a lot easier. So I'm gonna add some darks back into the shadows there, and of course, I'm just watching my scopes here on the side, and I'm gonna add some brightness to it. And you can see already it is looking much better than it was before. Now that I've made my correction, I'm just gonna go ahead and add another node here. And this is gonna be my basic primaries. And this is what I would normally do when I'm correcting an image. I'm gonna come in here and be like, you know what? I'm gonna add just a little more to the shadows here. I'm gonna lift up the gamma, which is kind of the midtones. And then I'm going to also lift the gain just a little bit, just to add a tiny bit more punch to it. But you can see we're starting to lose detail right over here in the veil and some other areas of the image. So let's say that I wanted to do things kind of an old school way. I could come down here and bring down my highlights if my highlights are a bit too harsh, which that would work and that's great, but it might not be enough granular control. So enter the HDR color wheels. These are awesome. Basically what it's doing is it's doubling the amount of granularity that you have inside of each wheel. And so there's some correlation going on here. So when you click on it, you're going to be greeted with these 6 dots up here, and they're just going to represent the different areas that you can adjust, kind of luminance values that you can adjust. We have blacks, dark, shadow, and then we have over here, we have light, highlight, and specular. And then you have global, which essentially is just the HDR color wheel version of offset. So just be aware of that. Now, the majority of the work that I need to do is probably in my shadows and my highlights and specular highlights. I'm gonna start with going over how I'm going to make the selection inside of those luminance values. Now, I could come into my qualifier and I could create a new node for highlights. I could select the specular highlights and I could make the adjustments in there. And that would be great. But I'm gonna save a bunch of time and just make my life a whole lot easier if I just use the HDR color wheels that are right here. If I select this icon that's just to the upper left of each of these color wheels, it will show you which part of the image has been pre-selected as the specular highlights in this case. And I can actually make even finer adjustments to it. So if you'll notice, to the left of the color wheel, I have this little kind of quarter circle that I can make adjustments to. And this is just adjusting the selection of those highlights. So now when I click on it, you can see, oh, would you look at that? More of the image is selected. That's because I brought it down. I'm telling it, I want you to reach farther into the highlights rather than just the specular highlights, and it's gonna go ahead and do that. But in this case, all I want to do is just bring down those specular highlights just a little. So I'm gonna leave it probably to where it just grabs the veil and some of these hot spots behind where the sun was coming through the trees. So now that I feel like I have a good selection, I can adjust the exposure. And we will go ahead and bring that down, just watching my scopes, and it brings those specular highlights down nicely so they're not too hot, just like that. And it's looking much better already. I can look through my highlights here, and those actually look fine to me. I'm not gonna do a ton of work to this, so let's go ahead to the blacks, dark, and shadow. And here you can see that there's nothing actually being selected in terms of the black area. There are some in the dark. I'm gonna adjust my darks so they incorporate just a little bit more of the shadows, just like that. You can see here, I'm bringing them up, maybe a little less, just like that. There we go. So we're just in the shadows of the suit jacket and the shadows, the shade of the trees. And then I'm gonna lower that exposure just to add a little more contrast and kind of get rid of the haze, the overall haze in the image. And by the way, once you've made an adjustment, you can actually grab this little slider, the selector here, and you can adjust it after you've made it. So you can see exactly what it's doing in real time. And if I grab my blacks, I can have my blacks reach up a little bit more into the shadows, and I can darken those even just a bit. Let me see if I'm even selecting. I don't have a lot selected, so we're gonna move it up just a bit more. See how much is selected. There we go. Those are some of the blacks, and we're going to go ahead and darken those. And by the way, you can even adjust the saturation and the overall color of all of this as well. Lastly, I'm gonna go ahead and, even though I said I wasn't going to, I am gonna make some adjustments in the light tones. Darken the light tones just a bit. Okay, and that's already looking really, really good. And all I've done is make adjustments to the overall color and to the high dynamic range color wheels. I haven't done anything else in terms of adding saturation. So if I wanted to, I could maybe go back to here and I can adjust my skin tones. I'm gonna add some more color warper points, and I could bring a bit more saturation into my skin tones, pull out some of those yellows. So you can see here, if I hover over the skin tones, they look pretty good. They might be a little on the pink side, so I will adjust that just a bit, maybe bring it back over just a hair. Looking at my vector scope over in the bottom right-hand corner, we are right on the skin tone line. So that's looking great. The last thing that you should know about when dealing with the HDR color wheels is that the limit for each of the range, the luminance range that you're selecting, kind of that qualifier range, if you will, is determined by the luminance before and after. So if I go into my shadows, you can see that my darks are pulling and they end right about here. My blacks can't pull any higher than those darks are limited. But if I raise my darks like this, then I can't go past it. And you can see that it stops at where the next one is and it starts at where the previous one was. So that's just something to be aware of when you're working with the HDR color wheels. So there it is. Thank you again so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. Be sure to like and subscribe. That way you don't miss a future upload. Like I mentioned, I have a new and updated color management workflow that I'm going to be showing you guys. It's the fastest and easiest way to work with almost any footage inside of DaVinci Resolve. And I'm going to show you how to do that in my next upcoming video. So be sure to stay tuned for that. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you in that next video.